Well, good evening. Welcome to the second episode of the Conservative Perspective. Welcome, everyone. Tonight we have a very special, episode with co-host Scott Willens, who is running for Westminster City Council in the state of Maryland. So we're going to be interviewing him tonight, and Dr. Willens has come on this show, has taken time to talk with us a little bit about his campaign and his fight for the people in Westminster and the citizens. So without further ado, Dr. Willens.
Good evening, Jason, and Good Friday, and happy Easter, happy Passover to everybody.
Yes. So first off, let's start with talking about your campaign. What are you fighting for in Westminster?
I think the most important issue, certainly safety is first, and that should be the mantra and the mission. Safety means feeling secure in your home, at work, in your vehicle, and walking down the street, regardless of what neighborhood you live in, your financial status, or your identity. And as a parent concerned about safety of our children and community, I'll support and enable all levels of law enforcement for all that they risk and sacrifice on our behalf in their ongoing collaborative mission. Lately, I've done some ride-alongs on the late shift with the Maryland State Police, the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, and the Westminster Police Department. And they all, in some way, shape, or form, have indicated that more training is always valuable. Specifically, legal training would enable them to not only better protect the rights of citizens, but protect themselves and each other from the still lingering but more cryptic aspects of the ridiculous defund the police movement. And there are still those in Westminster Police Department who don't have their body cams yet, but thankfully they're in the queue to receive them. And they've indicated that petty crimes are probably the most prominent violations. I cringe to use the term petty because I'm a big fan of New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, having grown up in that area, and his philosophy of cracking down on what he and I would consider gateway crimes to other more egregious felonies. Most of the more significant crimes in Westminster are not from the citizens of the city or even of Carroll County. Some of the rental property owners probably need to be reined in for the slumlords that they are. DUIs continue to be an issue, and I think the police would welcome proactive on-site screening of drivers at the venues that serve alcohol before they hit the road, and this would preclude a lot of the DUIs. And all three of the ride-alongs have been witness to the highly collaborative efforts of all three departments with otherwise very irregular jurisdiction boundaries. But my hosts were gracious, informative, affable, professional, empathetic, and selfless in all their interactions. But as a fellow but retired uniformed service member, I can appreciate that I really only marginally comprehend their responsibilities. So I thank them for all that they risk and sacrifice on our behalf, and look forward to a ride along with Westminster Fire Department. In my greater One Westminster strategy, points 2 and 3 are prosperity and accountability. And I think prosperity in the wake of COVID and the burdensome inflation we have now, the hiring and supply chain issues, those should be center stage for elected leadership. It's not the government's job to create jobs, but to foster a climate that's more favorable to business success. And the oppressive regulations and taxes drive away precious human resources and diminish our tax base. As a business owner, I want to make Westminster small businesses my business with the same determination that I advocate for my own animal hospital. And my third point on fiscal accountability means stewardship and transparency that should be expected of all public servants. I managed annual military budgets in my 20 years in the Army, from tens to hundreds of millions.
Well, it looks like Dr. Willens had a few minor technical difficulties. We'll try to get him back on here. But in the meantime, I want to talk about the channel and all of you. So if you did not already know, this is the interview with Dr. Scott Willens, who's running for Westminster City Council. And I'm going to just say this right now while we're on the stream. After this interview, we, as Old Line State Politics and myself, we're going to be taking a minor break. And so we're going to come back after a few weeks. But as of right now, we're just going to take a short break. I need a little bit of a mental break. But anyway, Dr. Willens is back. So let's add him back. Looks like we lost you there, Mr. Willens. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me? I switched to my phone. I'm not sure why it was not working with the computer.
We can hear you now. So I guess you can take off where you left off if you remember exactly where you were. Hello, Mr. Willens.
I don't know. I'm not hearing anything at this point.
Hello, Dr. Willens.
Trying on here again.
Can you hear me?
Again, I'm not sure where I lost you or where I was lost. Yes.
You were talking about your ride-alongs with the Westminster City Police and State Police.
Yeah, they have really highly collaborative mission, and I think they do that extremely well in spite of kind of an irregular jurisdiction boundaries between them. I think they've indicated that petty crimes are some of the most prominent violations, but I don't like I said, I don't like really using that term petty because I'm a big fan of New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani's philosophy of cracking down on what he considers gateway crimes to other more egregious felonies. And they felt that most of the significant crimes in Westminster are not from the citizens of the city or even Carroll County. Some of the rental property owners are kind of akin to slumlords and are not helping the situation in certain neighborhoods. They've indicated DUIs continue to be an issue, and I think that the police and the citizens would welcome a more proactive on-site screening of drivers at venues that serve alcohol before they hit the road. But they were very gracious, informative, and professional, empathetic, and selfless in all their interactions with the citizens that they dealt with on those ride-alongs. But even though I served in the Army for 20 years, I appreciate that I really can only marginally understand their responsibilities and thank them for all that they risk on our behalf. And then in my greater one Westminster strategy, point one was safety, points 2 and 3 are prosperity and accountability. And prosperity is critical right now in the wake of COVID and the burdensome inflation, hiring and supply chain issues, and that should be center stage for elected leadership. It's not our job at any level of government to create jobs, but to foster a climate that's favorable to business success and basically stay out of the way. So oppressive regulations and taxes drive away precious human resources and really diminish our tax base further. As a business owner myself, I would advocate for others' businesses with the same determination I do for my own and kind of make their business my business in this election. And my third point on fiscal accountability, stewardship, and transparency should be expected of all public servants. I managed annual military budgets from tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, as well as my animal hospital. Accountability should probably include a comprehensive review of the 27-year-old zoning, that city zoning that really no longer reflects the population size and demographic, the infrastructure and businesses. And it also means not spending $3 million on a municipal pool that only benefits several hundred citizens. As an environmental scientist, I can also confidently state that we should not be restricting and fining businesses for use of plastic bags without a full environmental impact statement on the potential adverse consequences of using alternatives to the plastic bags, not to mention the impact on businesses and customers. And I think new leadership and fresh ideas result from term limits, which was a national pledge I signed last year in my run for delegate that holds today.
Yes, absolutely. Agree with you on many points. Now, before we move on, I'd like you to tell us about yourself and your personal life and what you have done in your past, being, like you've mentioned, Army veteran and owning a veterinary service, veterinary company. So please touch on that.
Yeah, I went to veterinary school after college, went out to Minnesota and did as much as I could with special species, exotic species, wildlife, zoo, because I wanted to work at an aquarium or a zoo and be that kind of veterinarian. I did a couple of years in private practice and then worked at Mystic Aquarium, then went back to grad school for a PhD in environmental pharmacology and toxicology. Halfway through that, 9/11 happened, and I got mad, as a lot of people did, and decided to join the Army 3 days later. And by December of that year, I was commissioned and served 20 years. 18 of those years were in Maryland at installations here, mostly in the medical, chemical, and biological defense arena. So working on medical and chemical and biological threats that we face from adversaries, as well as the environment, like Ebola, and public health issues as well. So my last assignment at Walter Reed Institute of Research was focused largely on the COVID outbreak. I'm all for furthering the science. I am all against the mandates for vaccines and masks from not only a scientific but a constitutional standpoint. I have maintained my veterinary clinical skills through that time while working part-time in private practice, and 7 years ago started a business with 3 friends and colleagues, and it's thriving down in Clarksburg. I retired from the Army last January at 20 years, and I work part-time at my practice and part-time at the National Aquarium, working mostly with reptiles and birds, and within that time, spending a lot of my focus on rehabilitation of rescued stranded sea turtles and then release of those animals. And I sing with a couple of bands because, well, now I'm down to one. I sing with an 80s band called Weird Science, and that's my reset button for fun. I have 3 kids. 2 are out of college, and the third one's at Westminster High School and attending Stevenson next year. And I live in Westminster with my wife, Deborah, and our 2 rescue beagles, Daisy and Leonidas. And she has an off-the-track thoroughbred named Winter. That's her reset button, is to go riding. And that's our busy life. But I've always felt the inkling to serve. I did that for 20 years. I took an oath to protect and serve and protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And there's local ways to continue to do that on the Westminster City Council and to continue to give back.
Well, thank you. And yes, we thank you for your service to our country. It's it's a very, very important thing that a lot of people sadly are forgetting nowadays. And, I'm glad to see more people from who understand the sacrifice. So we thank you very much, Dr. Willens. And yes, it's good to have fun in your life every once in a while. So yes,
you have to be a whole person and not just about work. I mean, there's certainly the times to knuckle down when that's the only thing you can really focus on at the time. But then you need that reset, and you only go around once, so you might as well try to be involved in whatever interests you and whatever you can contribute. And to your point about service, and a lot of the news today has been focused on the report released about Afghanistan. And I'll tell you, even though I was in Iraq in 2007, it was one team, one fight, one mission against radical Islam, and that's an ongoing mission. And a lot of us, even whether we served in Afghanistan or not, really took it hard when the way we exited and the unnecessary lives that were lost, and also turning our backs on our allies in Afghanistan after 20 years.
Yeah, it was very, very tragic what has happened within the last few years of the Afghanistan withdrawal, but we're going to get into that a little bit later. So my first major question for your campaign is, what is your most important issue if you are elected to city council in Westminster?
Yeah, I think the safety was the number one, safety first, but the other two were certainly the prosperity and accountability. I mean, that's largely it. And mostly safety. I think in assisting, I'm looking forward to a ride along with the fire department as well. I think all of these departments do a great job, and they have a lot of support from the local leadership. We can always do better with that. We have realized in the last few years in particular that even though we're not living in California, Arizona, New Mexico, or Texas, that every state is a border state with the influx of illegal immigration, how that taxes our economy and criminal justice and education systems, and also the trafficking in weapons, in persons, and in drugs like fentanyl, which we're still seeing, being pervasive in our society and taking a lot of lives early. And in many cases now, from people who don't even know that they're being exposed to it, it's really a chemical warfare being waged by our foreign adversaries. It's trickling all the way down to our local level. So I feel safety is always first in that regard. And when it comes to drugs, crime, I know that our local fire department and EMS are looking for some greater resources too, that I'd like to help them be able to acquire. And the difficulty with doing that is people say, well, how are you going to accomplish more with the same amount of money or with less money? I think the council to this point has done a really good job of maintaining the budget where it's been for over 10 years. But recently they've also added a grant writer. And I think we can expand on that, and not to grow government, but I think a grant writer that's bringing in considerable money from state and federal or private grants for us to accomplish what we want without raising taxes is the way to go. And I'm not opposed to expanding that into a small team.
Absolutely. And raising taxes is always what kills politicians, and even Republican politicians in the state of Maryland. We saw Robert Ehrlich in 2002, who ran on no taxes, not raising taxes. And even though he didn't raise taxes, he implemented new regulations, and that's what ultimately killed him in 2006 when he lost his reelection to Martin O'Malley. And also the national environment being a blue wave year and Democrats being favored. But nonetheless, Republicans have to play smart in the state of Maryland, which leads me to to my next subject is what is your overall strategy to reach independents and moderate Democrats? Because Westminster, yes, it's in Carroll County. You have a lot of Republican voters, but you also have those more moderates. So how are you going to reach those more moderate to left-leaning Democrats?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we kind of encountered this issue with the Board of Education race when you can't have your view.
Going to try to get Dr. Willens back on here. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I don't think it's my end. We'll ask the question again so he can give an answer so y'all can hear the his explanation. So for all of you watching, please stay tuned because he'll be back on shortly. I apologize. Sometimes technology is just finicky and it doesn't work. So um, I do apologize. For everyone still watching, comment down what you'd like to see more from our channel later on. So Dr. Willens is back.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I had left you with. I'm not sure about the connection. Not used this app
Yeah.
before, but basically I have to work with others to accomplish missions in any job I've been in, whether in the Army or the private sector. So yeah, I'm hoping that experience in working on teams and also having kind of a diversity in my background, and I'm not talking just ethnically with myself or my kids, but with business, with military, with music, with the environment, things on all of those topics, that at least one or more of those things are relatable to voters.
Absolutely. And to touch on, we you received in your primary in 2022 3,765 votes, and that is in the whole District 5. Will you be able to get those margins in Westminster City or come close to that to be able to place? You have to win one out of four spots in order to win, since there's four people on the city council. So you think that's
Yeah.
enough to get you by, or are you going to see? Are we going to see a little bit different margins?
I think that, well, the overall total number of voters is going to be lower. One, of course, because it's within a city municipal election, but two, unfortunately, I think folks don't tend to come out and vote in as high a percentage for a municipal election on its own, as opposed to when it might be tied in with a general election for president or Congress. So that's unfortunate, because I like to see people involved in their right to vote at any level of election. So I think percentage wise, I'm happy with how I did in the last election, from the standpoint that I was coming out of nowhere, right out of retirement from the Army, going into that, and running against some folks who were well established. Don't want to say establishment, but you had one incumbent, you had several, three county commissioners who were running, and I actually did get more votes than one of them, and some other well-known and respected people. And that was an 8-horse race for 3 seats. I feel better about 4, and I do have a little bit more name recognition, obviously, than I had last year. Hopefully, for more for better than worse. But I came out of nowhere last year. This year, I have some name recognition, but certainly the three incumbents I'm running against have more in that respect. But for example, in my neighborhood, I mean, Westminster, like I said, is not the same as it was 27 years ago. So you have a lot of new neighborhoods. Mine has been here for about 4 years, which came after the last time my opponents ran, and the name recognition in this neighborhood is mine. So, and some people don't want to see the same people every year, and hopefully they'll look into who is running and our respective backgrounds and find what aligns best with them and who they think will best represent them going forward.
Right. And what you just touched on leads me to my next question is actually, how do you plan to work with the others on the city council to get things done for the citizens of Westminster?
I don't think pride has any place when you're dealing on a team like that with selfless service, and you're being paid, or at least it's not like when I was paid, say in the army, but there's still some financial there. But taxpayer money is, and certainly their confidence and their vote is going into your job. You owe it to them to work with others, and whether that be others on the council, for the city council, or Mayor Becker, or police and fire, businesses, and every citizen out there with questions they have, provided it's a respectful dialogue where people are actually listening to understand, and trying to find where that common ground is. I was pretty fond of a couple of the candidates for Board of Education during the last election, even though I didn't agree with some of their viewpoints. Tom Scanlon and Dr. Patricia Dorsey, but we had a great time for the 8 days of early voting during the primary, and again during the general election, as well as the respective election days. And we found a lot of common ground on things that could move forward, that more people could agree on, instead of being out on the polar ends of the spectrum. I think certain principles you can't really compromise on, but they were affable folks, and we enjoyed each other's conversation, and that's the kind of dialogue that I would wish to have. And I assured them that if I ever disagreed with them on something, I wouldn't be the person in the Board of Education meeting shouting them down the way some of their supporters had done to their opponents in the Battaglia Miller Whistler camp. And I think that was a big difference. And there were some nice PTA Patricia, Tom, and Amanda supporters who I met, who were respectful, and we had good conversations, and we talk to this day. But unfortunately, there were many supporters who then and now continue to malign and shout down conservative candidates and elected officials on the board, not just the Board of Ed, but in other positions. And we see that all the way up through the national level, unfortunately.
Right, and you can definitely see, even in the local standpoint, how polarized it is to one particular party. I'm not going to say, but how polarized it has been these last few years. Definitely looking at the political standpoint. So, moving
well,
on.
I would just caveat: I don't think that's even Democrats per se, or even liberals. That's just far left, because there's plenty of reasonable folks to discuss, and there's whack jobs on the far right too. But
Absolutely,
I would not call it necessarily a party, but unfortunately they tend to be aligned with a particular party.
Right. Yeah, there's polarization on both parties. No, not one particular person or one particular party at fault, but it does, like you said, it does tend to be leaning towards a certain one. So next question is exactly, why should people vote for you over the others who are already on the council? We have one Democrat who's been on there for almost 30 years now, and another one, and we have three conservatives, Republicans. I wouldn't say they're conservatives, but they're Republicans. So why should people vote for you over those incumbents?
Well, I'm certainly, I think, the most conservative candidate in the group. A lot of my strongly conservative standpoints are more on a national level. Have moderate to right of center views for local issues, but I'm the most conservative within the group. Other than Kevin Dayhoff, I'm the only veteran there, and certainly the only one with combat experience and 20 years under my belt. I've been a successful business owner for 7 years, and I have the most educational and experiential background in public health in the face of what we dealt with recently with COVID. I think that's important because we're not done not only with that, but with whatever is thrown at us next as an air quote crisis situation. And back to term limits, as you mentioned, Greg Pecoraro has served for 23 of the past 29 years. The seat doesn't belong to a person; it belongs to the people of the city of Westminster. And I think,
Absolutely.
With no disrespect to his honorable service, I think it's time to give this seat back.
Yes, I 100% agree with you. There is, even though there's not term limits, which there probably should be implemented, it's kind of a general known thing that give it up after 8 years. If worse comes to worse, do 12, but don't go
Right.
20, 24 years. It's a little ridiculous.
No, do something else. You can still serve, but do something in another capacity. And I agree. Some folks have advocated that 12 years should be the term limits, and I think there's something to be said for consistency of leadership and getting things accomplished that you started with. But for myself, I pledge again here on your show that it would be 2 terms of 8 years at the most.
Right. Definitely 100% agree with you. I mean, there are term limits on presidents for a reason after we saw FDR trying to do 4 terms. But, I think we should stick to 8 years, 2 terms.
And I think that's what people want to see also and why I mentioned about the veterinary hospital that I work part-time there 2 days a week and 1 weekend a month and cover some other times, or the bands or working at the aquarium is harkening back to the time of the founding fathers. That's what people did. You served your terms, and then you went back to your law practice, your farm, your business, whatever it was you had. And I think people want to see that there's more in your life, that not just to include benefits to your personality, but you're not hinging on this election. There's other things you're going to go back to doing if you don't win. And if you do, you're not so beholden to that position that you can't relinquish it when it's time to cede power to the next person.
Right. And isn't that why we got away from kings and dictatorship for the United States of America? So there's a limitation on who can represent. And there should be limitation.
Right.
So another question for the state, and then we're going to move on to a couple national questions. But who do you think the GOP? How do you think the GOP could win in Maryland as a whole on statewide offices like Senate, House, and governor?
Yeah. The problem is that of late, people have tried to, I think, pander and be shrewd and hide their true perspectives from the voters to appear centrist. And that's what happened in the governor race this go round with Dan Cox's opponent. And she lost overwhelmingly within the Republican Party. And I don't think she would have won even if she won the primary. But that would not have been a win for the GOP or the people. You have to show people who you are during the campaign so that there's no surprises if and when you're elected. Just like any other lie, the facade can't be maintained indefinitely, and there'll be cracks in it. So start and end with honesty. If I get elected, it's going to be for who I am, not who I'm not. And unfortunately, I feel that it's going to take the true exposure of the left for their failures at the national and state level before we really see a turnaround of voters in Maryland.
Absolutely. And we touch on how Dan Cox won against Kelly Schultz by, was it 10 or 12 points in the Republican primary? And if you look, the Republican voters chose who they want for governor. The Democrats and independents didn't. The Republicans chose who they wanted for governor. Same thing with the Democrats. But the problem is that when the Republican Party is going for these more conservative candidates in Maryland, which is a very deep blue state, they're not going to win over those moderate independent candidates. They're going to want to go towards those the Democrat candidate, even though both of the candidates were not moderate. They were very progressive on both sides. But it's sad that a lot of independents trend to vote for the
can't
Democrats.
Be a shiny penny race. It can't be a shiny penny race. They have to expose the Democrat candidate for the chinks in the armor and not play patty cake. That's not to say to be nasty. And if the person's perfectly nice on the Democrat side, then you still treat everyone with dignity and respect. But you have to, as you've asked me, point out the differences between myself and my opponents. It's nothing there is personal. These are facts that I feel I've laid out and distinctions. But there's no. I think all three of my opponents are honorable people who have served well. But here are the differences, and I'm not running against them. I'm running for the position. I'm not running against anything. I think that was a little different in the delegate race, where there were some questionable aspects of people's character and history, and that should hold whether they're in the same party with me or not. And I would have exposed that whether I was running or not, because I don't want people with certain flaws like that to be representing me in Annapolis, and I don't want, or at the national level or in the city council. I don't feel like anybody like that is of that diminished character running for city council. I know one of them. I've met another. I've met a third who's not up for reelection, and I like my discussions with them all, and I'll have to work with whoever it is. So, you don't come out of the gate with any kind of animosity or nastiness, because it's not only will it not serve you well in your campaign, it's not going to serve the people of Westminster well when you have to work as a coalition council.
Right, 100% agree. And like you said, you can't play nice. You have to expose the person for who they are and what they stand on. And I think that's very important. And as we saw, Dan Cox did hammer Wes Moore on many key aspects of his political career and personal life on exposing the lies and the deception that Wes Moore and his campaign had when lying to the people of Maryland. So, even though we might lose by 30 points, at least we put up the best candidate, not electorally, but the best candidate on policies. And that's what's most important, is not what you can win, if you can win, but who's better on the politics and policies on that standpoint of it.
All you have at the end of the day is your honor and integrity. So I'm not disguising what any of my stances are. I mean, I certainly want to speak to the things that the majority of reasonably prudent people can agree upon, but it doesn't absolve or remove my stances on other issues where we may disagree.
Yes, absolutely. So moving on, this is I have a few national questions that going on the national standpoint.
Okay.
Moving away from the state, but I want to ask, who are you at the moment supporting for president of the United States in 2024, if you've made that decision yet?
At this point, Donald J. Trump. There was never a greater commander-in-chief that I served in my 20-year career, and few others in our history, because he fought economic, political, and social battles so that we didn't have to fight them kinetically. He retook our gains in Iraq by squashing ISIS quickly after they had flourished under the Obama administration. He held the line against Putin and Xi Jinping, Kim Jong Un, and the mad mullahs of Iran. Now they're doing all of the things that they wouldn't dare have done under Trump because he meant what he said, whether you liked how he said it or not. And our economy thrived and was rapidly recovering after the hits we took from COVID. But like Trump said, they're not after me, they're after you. So as of
Yes.
now, I would say Trump. I like DeSantis, but I think he should wait for a number of reasons. One, Trump did support him, and he's where he is largely because of Trump's support. And two, the people of Florida voted for him to serve a 4-year term as governor, and he would have to step down 2 years into that. They didn't put their confidence and their vote in him to have him spend the second 2 years of his governorship running for office or having to step down and leaving them with someone that wasn't their choice 2 years ago.
Right, and that's the
But
argument I've been. Right, yeah, we have to support our candidates when they're the nominee. Whether if you like them or not, they're all most of the time they're going to be better than the other political party's choice. And that's what a lot of people don't understand is even though if you don't agree with someone 100% of the time, you got to take that 50 or 60% because at the end of the day, you got to get our party elected and you got to get them in office. So, and I think that's what a lot of people don't necessarily understand when talking about the party is that they don't like one aspect of someone, so they don't support them or vote for them at all. When honestly, even if you don't like one aspect, if you like 10 other aspects, take that. Take it because most of the time they're going to be way better than the other candidate. So
right.
How do you think that the Republican Party can take back the United States Senate as a whole? And in the state of Maryland, we had Robin Ficker talk to us a few weeks ago about his candidacy for Senate. Even though I don't necessarily agree with him on many issues, but if he's a nominee, I'll support him. But I think there's many better choices in the Republican primary lining up. But how do you think that we could possibly take back that Senate seat against a very vulnerable incumbent Democrat?
I think Bernie Flowers should run, but I think we need to stop drifting to the left as a party at a slower rate than the Democrats do, because that's what we're doing. They're drifting rapidly and we're drifting slower. So it seems like we're to the right, but when people's political crosshairs are so malaligned, they think that someone with the opposite viewpoint or a different viewpoint who may be centered is the extreme. We have to hold the line on key issues instead of compromising with those who never compromise when they're in the minority. They only want to compromise. They only want to compromise when they're in the minority. If they're in the majority, they say, as Obama said, go to the back of the bus. We have to beat them at their own game with the mail-in ballots and some of the other things that they're doing with prosecute people at all levels for election fraud and for criminal activity, the way they've falsely done with Trump. So basically put them on the defensive for a change so that they can't gain momentum on the attack all the time. And that's how we're going to take back. I think that's how we're going to take back the Senate, take back the country is expose, push back, beat at their own game, and do all of this with the backing of our founding documents of the Constitution.
Right, absolutely. And do you think that there's a chance, even though, let's say President Trump does win the Republican nomination and goes against Biden, is there a chance that if he loses, then we retake the House and the Senate? Or do you think that we could only barely hold the House of Representatives?
Oh, the more things slide as they have with the economy and gas going up and stock market and I guess businesses having hiring issues because the government is giving too many disincentives to work. As long as those things continue and people have the wool pulled off of their eyes, the more likely it is to to regain and hold the Senate and keep the House. But any minor improvements that Biden gets, for example, like he says, gas is down this much, but it's still up more than 50% of what it was under Trump.
Right.
So going up 300% and then dropping down a little bit is not a gain, and really have to not stop hammering home the message of the truth and not the partial truths, the way Kirby was talking about Afghanistan on the news with Ducey's question yesterday. And don't let them up. Don't let them up for air when you have the upper hand and they're grasping at straws and gasping at lies.
Right. Now, what is your opinion on the Afghanistan withdrawal under the Biden administration? Now, you're an Army veteran, so I just want to know what your thoughts on that whole situation was.
I was devastated by it because I knew people who fought over there. I was in Iraq, so not Afghanistan, but I felt like it was one mission, one fight. These are my brothers and sisters. So certainly the loss of those 13 lives. But I also know, having worked with Kurds and other bilingual, bicultural advisors when I was in Iraq, that the same thing was going on in Afghanistan. We had people risking their lives under the premise that we would have their backs. And I hear all the time, 20 years, we're war weary, it's too long, it's the nation's longest war. What these folks don't understand is that we're dealing with an enemy who is in this for the long haul, for 1,500 years and counting. And they will listen for our comments from Starbucks and wine bars complaining about war and endless wars and exploit it for the weakness that it is. Even if we feel like we're running on a treadmill to stand still, just to stay in one place, and it goes on indefinitely, I measure victory by every day that my kids are safe and nothing more. So every day they're not here on our soil threatening my kids, every day that this is hopefully still a free country and not a banana republic, every day that we fight that fight, even if I had to go back to Iraq and volunteer several more times, I would have done it to keep my daughters and my son safe. So, 20 years, it never would have been, and it never was the mission to make Afghanistan a second United States as far as our way of life. But you had 20 years of women being able to vote, get an education, homosexuals not being thrown from buildings, lack of tribal warfare, decrease in drugs, and people who grew up under that entire 20 years knowing a freedom they would not have known and didn't have previously, and it was taken away. And we looked at it like, well, we didn't have it the way it was in the United States. It was never going to be that way, and that wasn't the point. The point was a better life for them and more safety for us here without having a safe haven for funding, training, and harboring of Al-Qaeda and Taliban and other terrorist groups.
Right. Yes. And I think that people don't understand the sacrifice that goes into serving. When the disrespect of just the 13 people who died during the withdrawal, and it was just really a slap in the face to all of the men and women who died during those 20 years. That after you withdraw and then you saw everything that all the progress that had been made just go, like just get destroyed, go to nothing. It's really a slap in the face for everyone who died fighting for that. And it's just really unfortunate that, you know, we have an administration who absolutely does not care one bit about our military and the men and women who serve at the local level and overseas. So it's just really, it's really unfortunate.
These were the same relics that were, tormenting our military during the Vietnam War. They're still here. They're in positions like, people like John Kerry, still in prominent positions, reciting by, I guess, history revisionism by repetition, or current events revisionism, saying that there were no WMDs in Iraq because that's what General Colin Powell said, retired at the time. We found plenty of weapons of mass destruction, plenty of chemical weapons caches over there. But even if we had not, you're dealing with someone who is funding, harboring, and training terrorists in Iraq under Saddam regime. And as someone who had whole portions of my family perish in the Holocaust in Europe, when we say never again concerning the Holocaust, turn a blind eye when it comes to the Kurds or the Marsh Arabs in Iraq, simply because it's not my people or the same people. And that's why I asked to go, because of, or incremental creep of tyranny, the way Putin is done in Europe, similar to, the Anschluss and the Sudetenland under Hitler, and Neville Chamberlain saying peace in our time. It's not. It's enabling, and it's a weakness that our adversaries are looking for to exploit. They understand one thing, which is being resoundingly beaten, whether it's kinetically, militarily, economically, or socially. They only understand total defeat on their part, and they respect it. But I think we're too generous sometimes in our ceasefires.
Yes, absolutely. I 100% agree with you on that. Um, and moving on to our last question, because we're going to have to start wrapping this interview up, sadly. But on to our last question. What is your most concern for the nation as of now, with the state of our nation?
If I had to choose an all-encompassing word for it, I would say wokeness, because I think wokeness is the antithesis of meritocracy and the greatest faceless threat to our liberties that we must confront. It overarches and encompasses everything that's wrong and getting worse with this country, from its close, I guess, from the close relationships to wokeness would be moral equivalence and disproportionate selective outrage. Wokeness enables, but
Well, looks like Dr. Willens has lost his connection again. Like I said, sorry for the technical difficulties. Um, Buckeye, it is. I had to move it to 5:30 because of some things I forgot I had planned for this evening. So that is why uh, it is moved to 5:30. If you missed it, you can replay it. So I'm just going through and reading the chat real quick here. But Dr. Willens,
hopefully that's the last time I get booted. Apologize for all of
hopefully
that. Can you hear me?
we can hear you. Not governor yet. Not governor yet. So hopefully. Hello, can you
All
hear us,
right.
Dr. Willens?
Hey, do I have a minute to complete
Yes, you do. I can
about
say the
wokeness?
question again if you'd like, or you can pick up where you left
Can you
off.
still hear me?
I can.
Yeah. No, it's I think it's enables but isn't limited to illegal immigration, drug use, affirmative action, declining education, identity politics, gender fluidity, and what's really amounts to a war on Christianity and Judeo-Christian values. And these values are really inextricable from the Constitution. The left knows that they're part and parcel to the Constitution, which is why they attack both the Constitution and Judeo-Christian values. I think I can say this pretty objectively as a Jew. Without Christians of faith in the literal and figurative foxholes next to me, whether it was in the army or outside, there is no front line against the foreign and domestic enemies of the Constitution. And in the United States, it is not safe for Christians, is not safe for me or my children or for anybody, even atheists. And so Christians will probably not find a greater ally than they have in me. And I really appreciate you having me on and on Good Friday and on your way out to observe and at church. I appreciate the time and ability to be able to get a message out, but also to hear someone of your perspective who is, I have to say, probably in my whole life, the most far and above beyond their years in maturity and wisdom.
Thank you. So that is Scott Willens running for Westminster City Council. Thank you all for watching tonight's interview, tonight's podcast, The Conservative Perspective. I am your host, Old Line State Politics. Join us next time for episode 3. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless America. Good night, everybody.